Good afternoon, arts advocates, and welcome to Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund's office hours with our advocacy team. Thank you to all of those of you who have sent us kind thank you notes for these webinars and the information that they contain. We're humbled and we will continue to provide the best and relevant information as possible during these challenging times. My name is Jay Dick, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Partnerships here at Americans for the Arts. I'm a 50-something-year-old gay white cis male with short brown hair, a graying beard, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. I'm currently in my home office surrounded by mementos from my life. Americans for the Arts is committed to accessibility, and this includes our speakers offering visual descriptions of themselves, which makes the webinar more accessible for the audience members that are blind or have low vision. Today, we'll have the Q&A feature of the Zoom available for you to ask questions for our speakers throughout the webinar. We would do our best to answer all the questions, either through the Q&A feature or aloud with the presentations shared from our speakers. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available for you to review in the next week. And can we advance the slide, please? You will also be able to find the slides and additional resources on our website. And the link is going to be shared now in the chat box. In the event that we don't answer all the questions, please reach out to Americans for the Arts Public Policy Manager, Olivia Tarpley, so we can keep in touch. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the next few days for everyone to look at. Next slide, please. We'll have two panels for this webinar. The first one will be moderated by my wonderful colleague, Nina Ozlu Tunceli, along with some members from our outside consulting firm, David Reid and Adam Steinmetz, my apologies. We'll have a little Q&A session after that. And then we'll have a second panel with the Arts Advocacy Team here at Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund, giving you a little bit more of an update and answering some questions from you as the audience. And then we will close out from there. Next slide. Just as you all recall, we have a wonderful arts advocacy team for you to help you out with today. There's myself. Tushar Swain is our Director of Public Policy. As I said, Nina is our Executive Director of the Arts Action Fund and Chief Counsel of Government Affairs at Americans for the Arts. Olivia Tarpley is our Public Policy Manager here at Americans for the Arts. And behind the scenes is Morgan Fernari and Mattel Lyons Warren, who's helping us with our making sure that everyone can see this webinar very well and easily. So with that, I will go into our first panel with some very special guest speakers. David Reid again is the Policy Director at Brownstein Hyatt, and Adam Steinmetz is the Senior Policy Advisor at Brownstein. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nina and wish you guys lots of fun, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Jay. Let me make sure everything's rolling okay. On my, looks like our videos are frozen. Are we okay? We're good to go.
You're a little frozen, Nina, but we can hear you just fine, so just keep going.
Okay, great. Thank you. So welcome, my colleagues from Brownstein, David Reid and Adam Steinmetz. What a day to be having a webinar about what's going on in Washington, D.C. I'm going to, before I just jump into those questions, I know people are familiar with David, who's been with us for many years. David, just give us a quick background of your association with Americans for the Arts, and then we'll go to Adam.
Hey, sure thing. So David Reid with Brownstein Hyatt. I've had the pleasure of working with Americans for the Arts for, 8 years now, since 2017, actually at the very beginning of the first Trump administration, covering all things federal government affairs, federal funding for the arts, and also pulling in the resources of our firm, Adam being one of them, on behalf of the arts community. And again, just love the work that we get to do and very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And Adam, you're new to our members. Can you give us a little background of your expertise and where you've come and how long you've been at Brownstein?
Yeah, so I've been with Brownstein for about 4 years now, primarily in the healthcare sphere. I came from the House Budget Committee, where I was there for about 3.5 years under both Steve Womack, who's an appropriator, and then Jason Smith, who's now the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. On the committee, I did everything healthcare, VA, Social Security, and proper payments. Got to do a lot of work across leadership, appropriations committees, a little bit of everything. I actually worked at NIH for about a year and a half before that at the National Institute on Aging. I have a PhD in neuroscience and spent about 10 years working in labs on early drug development. So,
Wow.
to be
Cool.
here and happy to answer all questions.
Thank you. And I was remiss in starting us off with a visual description. So I am a Middle Eastern woman with long black hair and a beautiful Arts Vote backdrop behind me that was designed by Shepard Fairey for the Arts Action Fund. David?
I'm a white man with brown hair, blue shirt with a blurred background in an office. And yeah, that's me.
Adam?
White male, brown hair, unkept beard right now, and sitting in my kitchen.
Okay, great. Beautiful background, by the way, of your home. Okay, so guys, the president released this morning a much anticipated document called the skinny budget, which is not something that's always done. So let's first familiarize our audience with what a skinny budget is. Who wants to take that first?
Sure. I can kick us off and then kick it over to Adam, who is truly a budget expert. But a skinny budget, it is essentially a stripped down version of the full presidential budget request. It provides top level numbers and policy signals, but leaves out detailed agency background breakdowns. So it's used either when time is short or when the administration wants to make a strong political statement, as Trump's team is doing in this instance. And in this case, it frames a massive shift in priorities. Obviously, if you all have seen it, it cuts over 22% of non-defense discretionary programs while boosting defense and border enforcement spending. The most important thing to know, though, is that it's not binding. This is strictly a recommendation coming from the administration, signaling what their priorities are. It's truly Congress, though, that takes these recommendations and then makes those decisions when they're crafting their budget for the appropriations process, which is officially kicking off with this document.
Right.
Adam?
I think you hit that pretty well. Again, a lot of times these happen in the first year when they haven't been in there long enough to put together a full budget. I think we expect the full budget in the next month or two to come out. And again, that'll have a lot more detail within specific agencies. There was a desire to get this out now ahead of reconciliation so they could use some of these numbers to help members with cuts they want to see. So it's a messaging document. Again, when I was on budget committee, we used to take this and we would put it on the shelf. It was great. We would do a hearing, say thank you, and then move on. So, people would constantly see things in here, rightfully panic. But when we'd come to us and appropriators, we'd say, this is just a starting point, something the president has to do.
Yeah. And Adam, does it make a difference in this year where the president has a Republican-controlled House and Senate? Do they listen harder? Do they try to abide to his recommendations more?
Yes and no. I mean, so yes, they'll look to see what he's saying in there. And what we used to do is, I remember specifically when I was there was a pediatric cancer initiative he was running, and we would pull that out and say, look at this great, but we would ignore some of the cuts, right? When it talked, like I was in charge of like the NIH portfolio, and every year it'd say NIH cut 10%. And we would just kind of ignore that, but say, well, look what he's doing in childhood cancer. These are the good parts. So I think they use it to highlight the good parts they want to push, but I think also you've seen maybe Susan Collins has come out already against the budget, right?
Okay.
There's other members, I think, who are privately this isn't what we're going to do, right? Again, it's a starting point of the budget process.
David, you started off by saying there's an overall 22% cut from the previous year. Did I hear that right?
That's right.
So 22%. Does Congress also have to abide by that overall budget cut?
They do not. Again, there will be, and this bill or this skinny budget is unique in that it is so draconian in its cuts or in its proposed cuts. So, again, it is not binding, and it is certainly not the number I think that will eventually come out of the process, because, constitutionally, it is Congress that makes those decisions.
Right. So let's go into a few of the details of what's in this skinny budget. David, you, as you mentioned in your remarks when describing your affiliation with Americans for the Arts, you've been around since Trump won in 2017. And prior to that, you were with Brownstein, obviously, but you were started with us with 2017. What is in this current budget, and how's it compare to what he did 8 years ago?
Sure. So overall, there are deeper cuts to a myriad of the different agencies and programs, and there are eliminations that were not eliminated in the past. One common thing, though, is that like in 2017, he did propose elimination of the cultural agencies. So obviously NEA and NEH, IMLS and CPB, they were all proposed to be cut in his previous skinny budget and full budget recommendations. And as we all know, there actually were increases to those funds back then. That may be a difficult thing to see in this environment, but again, we've been here before in this particular, at this particular juncture as it relates to the cultural agencies. And we have, a number of congressional champions, as Adam already mentioned. Susan Collins has already come out against the budget proposal that was released this morning.
Remind everyone what role Susan Collins has?
Sure. She is the chairman or the chairwoman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And, there are other arts champions in the past, in the first Trump administration, that received this recommendation to cut the NEA and the NEH, and they ended up helping to shepherd in an increase. So that's why the conversations that you all have and that we have on the arts community's behalf are so very important on the Hill with those champions to continue to make that case. Because again, it is Congress that ultimately has the authority to make those decisions.
So this year, so the NEA and NEH at least have been on level funding at $207 million for a couple of years now. But the Senate at one point last cycle had recommended going up to $209 million. So is it like, do we pass the laugh test, let's say, by actually asking for a small $2 million increase for these agencies that have gone, at least NEH in particular, has gone through a terrible DOGE cut. The president has now put in a skinny budget to ask for zero. What do you think about us asking for just a little bit more based on something that was appropriated on the Senate side?
I think given the fact that it was appropriated on the Senate side, it absolutely makes sense to be, advocating for that number. We've been advising a number of other clients who are advocating for programmatic funding as well as broad strokes funding. And, we're telling them the same thing. Going through this process is important, and the community has a number that they'd like, and that obviously there is already precedent for one side of the Hill, with a particular number. So yes, now you've got that, and then you've also got expectation. I think that a hope for level funding is more realistic in terms of what we're thinking through. But yes, I think the number that we have been talking about for weeks and months now is absolutely appropriate. Adam might have other thoughts.
No, I 100% agree. I think there's no harm in asking for a small increase, especially if it was proposed on one side, right? The worst they can say is no, right? So I think it does no harm. Again, if you show value and you show the importance of these programs, I think Congress will continue to fund them, right? I think you just have to have a strong message, clear message to them, and have your champions in place. And I see no reason why you couldn't get a small increase.
Great. We will definitely go for that. Tell me about, there are terms that our advocates have heard at times where when they meet with a member of Congress who sits on an appropriations committee, they talk about allocations, 302B allocations. And I'm going to give this one to you, Adam, first to answer. One, what are these allocations? Do the appropriators do they know what their allocations are already? Are the allocations different between the House and the Senate? And in the end, do they stick to these allocation caps when they reach final conference?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back. And so there's what are called 302A and 302B allocations. So a 302A allocation is usually set by the Budget Committee, where that's your total discretionary spending amount, defense and non-defense. So you may say discretionary, we're going to spend $2 trillion this year, right? And then it's up to the appropriations committees to then divide that $2 trillion between defense, healthcare, all your different appropriation subcommittees. Then that's the 302B. And then within the Bs so you may say labor appropriations, you have 300 billion. That's your 302B number. And then it's up to them to then divide that. Okay, NIH is getting this, CDC this to further sub. The reason to go back is we don't have 302As yet, right? We don't have and that's usually referred to as top line spending numbers.
Got it.
And I think last year that number differed between the House and the Senate up until they went to a CR, right? There was a complete disagreement about what the top line spending should be. So until you have a top line, it's really hard to figure out what your 302Bs are. So to answer your questions, the 302As can be different between House and Senate. The 302Bs can be different between House and Senate. And those can be negotiated up until final appropriation bill signing. So they're ever changing.
When do you think they might, now the crystal ball comes out, when do you think they might come out?
Oh, a while. I mean,
Really?
reconciliation is taking all the air out. I mean, I think Tom Cole, who's the head of the appropriations in the House, said he wanted to get the individual committee bills out by April. Well, we're through April and there's been no discussion, right? So
Right.
I think this is again going to be one of those that appropriations is done in, December. But they'll have to start talking. And again, the House will decide, here's what our 302A is, and then they'll start dividing out the Bs. But again, those will change between what the House and Senate want up until final bill passage. But maybe David is more bullish than I am.
David.
No, I am, of the same mind, Adam, having been through this a number of times, especially, going through a reconciliation process like this in the past. I think the last time that the Trump administration pushed through a reconciliation package, it wasn't until the very end of the year that got done, and that was the the tax cut bill that they are renegotiating to try to extend this go around.
Right. For the last couple of years, something known as earmarks, more officially, maybe congressionally directed spending, things like that, community projects, have not been included because there have been long-term continuing resolutions. What do you think is the appetite for actually passing these appropriation bills and not relying? I think there will be interim continuing resolutions because the fiscal year will end September 30th there, and they clearly won't even be done. But in the end result, do you think that there is going to be another long-term continuing resolution, which would mean level funding? So in the case of the NEA and NEH, that means 207 million each. Going into now what's called FY 2026 funding, or individual bills that might have a chance to include earmarks. Crystal ball thoughts?
I think they would like to get them done. I think 2 years of a CR in a row, especially for Republicans in the defense space, is tough. So I think there's appetite to get them done. Again, you're thinking that Congress won't be dysfunctional in any way. And, I think that Congress is running very much in what's the next hurdle in front of us, not looking out too far. So I think that's why it just depends on how long this reconciliation bill takes, right? If we're still
Right.
talking tax in November, appropriations are going to get kicked till next March to May, right? But if let's say they get the reconciliation package done by 4th of July, then they'll move to appropes, right? So it really just depends on, in my view, how much does reconciliation take air out of everything?
Right. And we're going to talk about reconciliation in a moment. But just to finish off CR, David, is there anything you want to add here? Okay. So the dirty word, reconciliation has been invoked a few times. Let's first start off with definitions. Adam, to you first.
Yeah, so reconciliation is a process in which Congress can enact budget-related proposals. So that could be tax cuts, that could be things that have budgetary impacts. And it changes the rules in the Senate to needing only a simple majority vote. And so you see this commonly with control when one party has control of the presidency, the House, and the Senate. It has happened in the past where I think with Clinton, where he was president, but it was Republican House and Senate, they got it through. But it's one party control. They can enact major policies to tax and usually mandatory spending provisions, changing the rules, right? So you don't need the 60 vote threshold in the Senate anymore. Now you need the 50. So we're now in an environment starting in January where it's House, Senate, Republican, or House, Senate, President are all Republican. So we're now looking at reconciliation.
Okay. Now, reconciliation can involve multiple things. And in the case of this year's scenario, as I understand it, and please add to this after I mention it, tax reform packages very similar to the ones that were from the first Trump administration, debt ceiling limit changes to increase the debt ceiling because of expenses being absorbed, not enough revenue coming in, probably related to those tax cuts. And then also some expenditures to programs that are not considered discretionary funding, as I understand it. Could you explain what is not considered discretionary spending that is at their disposal to cut those expenses in order to offset either a lower debt ceiling increase, or the tax reform cuts to lower income coming into the government?
Yeah, so government spending is in two buckets, as you mentioned, mandatory and discretionary. Of the federal budget, I believe it's like 70%-ish is mandatory spending, 30% is discretionary. So your discretionary spending is what goes through appropriations process every year.
What we just spoke about.
NIH,
Education.
CDC, Department of Ed, VA, there's a number of things in there.
Right.
Department of Defense, right? Your non-discretionary, which is your mandatory, is mostly Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. There's some food assistance programs in there. Those don't every year need to be approved by Congress. They're on what's known as autopilot. In reconciliation, you cannot touch Social Security. That's a rule. So that whole bucket's off. So that leaves Medicare, Medicaid, and then food assistance programs, essentially your SNAPs, other things like that. So they have said they will not touch Medicare. So that's another bucket off of there, which essentially leaves Medicaid and SNAP. And that's where you're seeing a lot of focus and a lot of news stories are being written around those. So it's mostly Medicaid is where the cuts in spending are going to occur.
Wow. David, do you want to kind of explain for those who may not know what Medicaid and SNAP are?
Sure. So Medicaid is a health insurance program that is provided to people who are below a certain income threshold, but also in many parts of the country, a majority of kids. And that, I think, is something that a lot of folks don't understand. There are also a number of states where the Medicaid programs go through a state run program by a different name. So again, you have a number of people that may very well be on Medicaid, but they don't actually know that they are. So it's a big entitlement, and it's also one of the biggest chunks of money, as Adam mentioned, that they are looking at as a potential pay for for some of the extension of these cuts and some of the other new tax cuts, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security that the administration is proposing. SNAP is also known as food stamps. That goes through the Agriculture Committee. And again, a big chunk of money that they're looking to use and to reallocate for their priorities. And one of the things that I think we touched on earlier is that one of the delays that we're seeing in the reconciliation process is the markup for those committees that deal with Medicaid and SNAP. So Energy and Commerce deals with Medicaid. That's been pushed from next week to the week after. And same with SNAP through the Agricultural Committee. Again, we'll continue to see those delays because understandably there is a lot of disagreement on the amount of cuts that people think are palatable, but also exactly what that amount is.
And Adam, isn't one of the other options to just increase the debt ceiling more in order to pay for these things? And why is that not necessarily being used as an option?
Yeah, I mean, in reconciliation, you technically don't have to pay for anything. You could just spend $4 trillion and not offset. However, there's a number of members who are very far-right conservatives who are very concerned about national debt levels. And they view a $3 trillion, $4 trillion tax, write-off tax cut with no offsets to just be blowing up the debt. And so they wanted to see some kind of offsets in order to agree to do the big tax cuts. But they don't have to, right? They could decide tomorrow they don't need to offset any of this. They'll just raise the debt limit, extend tax cuts, and they could.
And theoretically, based on early signs of the budget package that the House put together for reconciliation and the one that the Senate did, they're very far apart. And one is relying more on debt ceiling increase, it looks like, and the other one is relying more on the House side, more cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, no, they're very far apart. And I think we've heard from conversations, they're still, the Senate was approaching and going along with the thought that there might be two reconciliation packages, one for a defense immigration and then a second one later for tax. So I think the Senate has still given some flexibility to move towards two if this does drag on. So they're very different in their scope right now. But again, they're going to have to come together on one package eventually.
Right. And this is where you're thinking the House has declared they want to make a 4th of July gift to the president of one big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, of the reconciliation bill to send over to the Senate. Do you think they're going to make that deadline?
The House may be done by then, but the Senate won't.
Right.
But the House, yeah, they could be done by the 4th of July. But again, each week this slips, it's less likely. But it won't be, I think they were hoping to be on president's desk by 4th of July. That's not going to happen.
Okay. And I know that one deals with mandatory spending, reconciliation, and the discretionary funding that we start at the top of the hour is something different. Is there a world in which what happens with the reconciliation bill, especially if debt ceiling increases a lot, that could have a negative impact on the discretionary spending negotiations?
That's a good question. And I'll give an initial thought, but love David's opinion as well here. I could imagine a scenario in which they don't save. So they've had this $1.5 trillion number for saving in the House of cuts they want to make. Let's say that goes down to 1.3, right? So there's 200 billion. Do they tell the conservatives, the fiscal conservatives, hey, we'll make that up in the appropriations process? We'll do, will they try to make that promise? But the appropriations process has to get Democrat support. So they could make that promise, but I don't know if it'd have any weight. So there could be, but I think that's a really outside slim chance. But David, love your thoughts here too.
No, I agree 100%, Adam. don't see that scenario playing out in any differently than you just outlined.
Yeah. David, in particular, from a Democratic point of view, especially on the Senate side, is there some strategy afoot to have the Democrats show some kind of more power than they've been able to currently yield or wield, I should say, not yield, wield that could be different this time around?
In respect to the
Like
budget,
either
or
stopping terrible things from happening in their mind, or like, for instance,
right.
I suspect that a House discretionary spending bill for education is going to come out zeroing out the Department of Education. The Senate's not going to put up with that. Maybe. I mean, it is Republican controlled. Will they put up with something like that?
I think a lot of their power, unfortunately, is rhetorical power, meaning they do not have the gavels, they do not have a majority, similar to the situation in the House. Therefore, a lot of it is based on their ability to rally the troops and also to pick off and to tick off some of the Republicans, meaning pulling them to their side on a number of these, on a number of these issues. So if you can get some of the moderate Senate Republicans to cross the aisle and support some of the things that the Democrats are all in lockstep in support of, that's where you can really have some impact. And I think, giving them the opportunity to do that, but also ensuring that, the constituents in those states of those Republican senators are making their voices heard, and are aligning with what it is that those Democrats are pushing for. I think that's where you can see some progress, because, of course, the benefit in the Senate is you do need 60 vote majority on most bills outside of reconciliation. Therefore, you are going to need to have Democratic support for certain things to move forward. And there are going to be some things that the Democrats are not going to allow to go through.
So an example
So
of
you do
that
have
would
that
be
stopgap.
an example of that would be these discretionary spending bills that we talked about at the top of the hour. That requires a 60% filibuster proof
Or the 60 vote, yes.
majority,
Yes.
as opposed to the reconciliation bill that Adam talked about, that because the special rules only require the 50 plus, since the vice president can be the tiebreaker.
Correct.
So my final question has to do, and then I want to alert the audience that we're going to take questions from the audience as soon as we're done with this last question. So put your questions into the Q&A box, please. Okay, we've also heard about a rescissions package. Where does this all fit into the scenario of reconciliation first and then the discretionary spending bills second?
So rescission package is a proposal that has not yet been released or sent by the White House. It's a recommendation on cuts to already appropriated funds. And our understanding is that it's a $9.3 billion package that would essentially cut funds from this Corporation for Public Broadcasting, as well as the State Department cultural programming programs that I know we care about, as well as USAID and some of those. We had expected it to be released by the administration earlier this week, but because of controversy around what was actually included or was likely going to be included in that rescissions package by a number of Republicans, it has not yet been sent out. Also, because of the ongoing negotiations around reconciliation, I think that the political calculus was that it was not ripe to release it at the time that they had planned. But Adam might have some more intel on that than I do.
Yeah.
I think you're completely right. And I just want to highlight, when the president gives that to Congress, they can modify it, right? So if he puts all that in there, Congress can take out pieces. So maybe it would leave USAID, there's different ways they can cut it, right? So just because that gets brought to Congress doesn't mean that's the whole package. That's what they're taking up. That's what they're voting. They can remove things, right? They can say, we agree with you on these programs, but not these programs.
Right.
So it's modifiable. And again, the House and the Senate may have different views, and they'll have to agree on that. And if they can't come to an agreement, After 45 days, the money gets released and it all goes back. So they have to act in order for it to occur.
So a couple of clarifications. One is we are talking about current year's funding and cutting that back from CPB and U.S. foreign aid, USAID, through USAID or State Department for it. Okay, USAID. Number two, something you referred to, Adam, is this 45-day rule connected to something called the Impoundment Control Act. And there are special rules of how many votes you need in the Senate too. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so when this gets transmitted to Congress, they have 45 days to act. And so if they do, as I said, if they don't act, the money gets released, the president has to spend it. If they do act on it, the Senate changes their rules again to only needing a simple majority vote. So you'd only need 51 senators to vote for this in order for it to go into effect, to rescind the money. There's some changes also in debate time and other things, but it does change it to a simple majority.
Okay. Okay, thank you guys. So I'm going to ask Jay to come on now and let us know what some of the questions are.
We have a lot of great questions here, so we're going to get going right into it real quickly here. So, and they're tough questions, so be on guard, Adam and David. So, thus far, the administration doesn't seem to feel bound by Congress's appropriations. They have canceled spending that was already appropriated. They're closing down programs that spend the money, USAID, etc. Does Congress even matter?
Yeah, I mean, they still have to give the dollar amounts out. And I think there's pushback behind the scenes that's not always public. When some of these programs are getting affected, that's why it's important to have these champions. I know when some of the USAID money was held up, we went to certain members and then they would talk to the administration, money would get released. So you have to have a champion in your lane who will fight the administration, talk to administration officials, stuff like that to get it in. But there's going to be a lot of court cases surrounding a lot of this. This administration feels like the dollar amounts that are appropriated by Congress are a ceiling. So if I'm to give the National Endowment of Arts $200 million, they don't have to spend that. That's just the most they could spend, right? And so their view is maybe we could just spend 100 million, right? So there'd be a lot of court cases surrounding this. A lot of legal scholars feel like it's pretty clear Congress has the power of the purse. And so I think it'll eventually get sorted out.
David, any additions?
No, and I think we're going to continue to see the administration push the limits of of the impoundment issue until there is an ultimate decision that is likely going to be going up to the Supreme Court. So agree with Adam. I think that the course of action now is to continue to make the case to the champions on the Hill, especially Republicans, because those are the ones that I think are going to have the ability to lean in the most while we're dealing with this particular push from this administration.
And I'll just add, I think you've seen Susan Collins push back a little bit on this. I think you see cracks form. I think there's other areas outside of this where the administration is pushing to see how much power they have, where Republicans are behind the scenes saying no and they're filing court cases. They're not very public, but I do. Appropriations is one of those. Those are typically institutionalists who value the rules and they don't want to lose power. So I think behind the scenes there's a lot happening that just isn't public.
Adam, that leads us to another set of questions that we've gotten. But basically, this time around with the skinny budget, is it more likely that Republicans are going to go along with it out of deference to President Trump, or are they still going to really push back?
No, I think you still see pushback. Again, I think Susan Collins was very quick today with her statement. If I would be more worried if there were no statements that came out, but Susan Collins had one ready to go hour or two after this came out. So they will push back. Again, it's Congress's jurisdiction. It's their powers, the power of the purse. They will set these things. They will take some of what the president says, but it's ultimately up to them. And again, in the Senate, they have to come across the aisle and get 7 or 8 Democrat votes. So there will have to be bipartisanship here unless there's another year-long CR, which I again don't think there's a lot of appetite for.
David, anything you'd like to add?
No, agree with Adam. That's exactly what I'm tracking.
So we just had another question that basically is pushing back a little bit and saying, but the administration is pretty much ignoring what Congress is doing now. So what's going on here? And so I think, Adam, you've kind of hinted about this, court cases, stuff along those lines. Where do you see the next, say, 6-9 months going?
More court cases. Again, I think David said it. This administration is trying to push to see where the line is, right? But Congress is also very worried internally about losing the House at the midterms. And I think Trump is also aware of that because I think the view is if the House was to flip to Democrat, he could get impeached again. He could get, everything ends. So I think there is going to be some kind of, correcting, I would say. I remember we had an event and a congressman said at the event, there's a lot you can do in the first about 100 days that people forget about by midterms. Well, we're at 100 days now. You can't do this into next year. People won't forget about it. So I personally think you'll start to see kind of a slowing down of some of this because midterms are coming up in, 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, I'll reiterate, it's important to be advocating these priorities to those vulnerable Republicans because they are the ones that are the majority makers for the Republican conference. And they're the ones that are going to be listened to, and they're the ones that have the most to lose if these policies and cuts and rescissions continue at the pace that they're going.
This is leading in, your comments just are leading into another vein of questions that we are seeing in that, we've seen IMLS get gutted. We're seeing NEH get gutted, knock on wood, NEA so far. Two questions was, why are we playing this game about appropriations for next year? Why aren't we doing something else? So the question is, is it appropriate for us to be, playing the game for the next fiscal appropriations? Is there anything else that you see happening out there, not necessarily with just the arts, but the nonprofit in general, i.e. court cases, stuff along those lines? Is this the right strategy right now? Are we playing the game that we should be? I'll call on David first because.
Yeah, no, I think that the answer is that we've got to be doing both, right? I do know that the organization and AFTA is pursuing a strategy to push against what it is that's happening, this year with the potential cuts with the potential cuts to NEA and the potential decrease in headcount there. And, already seeing some of the, some of the attacks on other cultural entities, of course, looking at the executive order this morning, calling for the pullback of NPR and PBS, right? So, you've got to both look at what it is that's happening now and address that and push against that through outreach to Congress, to sign-on letters, to activating the grassroots and having folks reach out to the Hill, but also at the same time ensure that we're continuing the drumbeat on the appropriations front for FY26. Because unfortunately, if we don't continue that, then it makes it a lot easier for them to pull back or not as aggressively push for these funds that year in and year out we count on and we hope to see continue to grow. So it's a all of the above strategy in my mind.
Adam?
Yeah, I'll agree with everything David said. Just add that a lot of what you're seeing at the agencies is reduction in staff, and I think the administration, rightfully or wrongfully, think reducing staff doesn't have an impact on getting dollars out, right? And so you could reduce staff levels, but they still push out the same amount of money, right? So I think they're two different things, but the staffing you do have to watch out for, but I think you still allocate the same amount of money. They just think AI can take over and then staff just take on bigger loads.
Anything else you'd like to add to that one? Your video might be going a little off because
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I was. I'm just asking
Okay.
if there's anything else you'd like to add to that.
my way of answering it is going to be asking a question to the guys, and that is, Elon Musk has left the building, as they say, and no longer in DC, at least, spending all his time doing stuff with Doge, it appears. But when does Doge end? When will this crisis part of Doge be over, you think?
I think it continues to exist. And I think they maybe I think we've been saying they've been going into everything with a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel. I think you start to see, a more of a scalpel approach going in forward, right? They will keep an eye on things. They'll try to work within some of the bigger agencies. I think, Center for Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, they'll keep a focus on those where there's big dollars. They'll watch the next appropriation cycle, but I think you'll see a lot smaller of actions coming out from them. But David, would love yours as well.
Oh, I think you're right. I think that you're not going to necessarily have the the attention that is garnered by the fact that you have Elon Musk at the head going forward. But I do think that you'll continue to see that, and I also think that you'll continue to see copycat types of efforts in the states, which we've already seen.
Oh.
One more question for everyone here is, why is this administration specifically targeting the NEA, NEH, and PR and the like, or are they going to everyone?
I mean, they've hit everybody. I think we've seen them hit almost every agency. USAID was one of their first, right? Big cuts to some of those. I think they just have a very fundamental difference in how to run the government than previous administrations. And again, they're just going through it with a sledgehammer right now, and then seeing what the repercussions are. But I think they're going after everything that they don't see as core government responsibilities. And again, I think we can all disagree on what those responsibilities should be, but I think to them it's just a core difference.
In other words, they're not just targeting the arts. They're after everything, even normally Republican, pro-Republican policies that are out there. So lots of different things there. David, anything else before I ask one quick question before we're done? One other question,
go for it.
And you might have referenced this earlier. I wasn't quite sure, but are earmarks coming back?
Ooh, good question. Go for it, David.
I mean, currently, as of now, in the guidance that's come out from both the House and the Senate appropriations committees for FY26, they are there. But Adam may know more and may know better as to whether or not they will maintain. The reason why you had earmarks not get paid out or get awarded this go around was because we are currently in a year-long CR. But for looking forward, I'll be curious Adam's thoughts. But they are currently in there for FY26.
Yeah, I think they stay in, but maybe they get cut back a little bit. I don't think Trump loves them, but also it's the way to get votes.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you're trying to get votes. So I think they maybe stay in, but they get cut down a bit.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, thank you so very much. Adam, David, we really appreciate your time. If you can stick around and answer some of the other questions in the chat. David, Adam, thanks so much for your time. We deeply appreciate it. Nina's connection, I think, got a little weird. Hopefully she'll be back here shortly. Have a great weekend, everyone. And we appreciate your expertise and all that you do day in and day out for the arts and culture across America.